Hello, hello. You're listening to the Better Workday podcast with me, Niamh Moynihan. Saying no at work is easier said than done, especially when the person asking is more senior than you. So what do you do when you're asked to take on just one more thing when your week is already jam-packed? In this episode, I'm going to look at saying no to people who are more senior than you at work. So let's get into it. Saying no at work was never something I was good at. I have to be honest, this is definitely not something that has come easily to me, and I still struggle with it a little bit. And as a result, for many years, I regularly overcommitted and then overworked rather than risk being seen as unhelpful or not being able to handle a fast-paced environment. But as you can imagine, that didn't always work out as well as I wanted. I burnt out multiple times. I ended up leaving people down and missing deadlines because I had too much on my plate. I ended up saying no when I shouldn't have and in the wrong way. And it never really felt like I was as in control of my workload as I could be. And so from today, I would like you to just think about how you can take these ideas and make them your own so that you can feel more confident saying no at work to people more senior than you when you need to. Okay? And so there's quite a bit for us to cover in this topic today. And I think the first has to be, why is it so hard to say no? Especially to, your manager or other managers or people in more senior positions. And I think the obvious thing is we want to be helpful and to be seen as helpful and as team players. Nobody wants to work in a company where people don't help each other. And so we want to be helpful. And of course, there's probably a bit of a worry, especially if you're very junior, that it will be received negatively and that will have a negative impact on your career within the company. And, I think especially when you're new in a job, and if you're in probation, you're worried that if you say no, that could be the end of it. And so that's a real fear that I think many of us experience and have experienced. And then I suppose at another level, I think quite often, I know for me anyway, I assumed that the people more senior knew better than me in terms of priorities. I thought that they knew something I didn't know, which is why they were asking me to do something even though I was already working on something else. I was like, surely they have all the information and have this kind of bigger picture I don't have. Now, of course, that wasn't always the case, but that's an assumption that we often make. And finally, honestly, we haven't seen anyone else do it. And this is, a challenge when we work in distributed teams where we're not really working side by side. If we don't see somebody the same level of us, maybe in our team, pushing back successfully against somebody more senior, we don't know how it's done. We don't even know if it is done. And well, I'm not going to be the first one, is what I would have thought anyway. But look, it is important to push back when you don't have capacity. Or nearly more importantly, if you don't have the skills or the experience to do the work. Because it can lead to overcommitment, increased stress on your side, a hidden overtime, working through lunch or skipping lunch, catching up at the weekends, compromising on other work in order to try and pack more in, just kind of skipping that last step and thinking it'll be fine. And because that work then, or that approach, that attempt to build, a reputation for reliability through compliance, saying yes all the time, could lead to the opposite outcome. So you might be perceived as overwhelmed, unreliable, or, as I said, burnt out. And that definitely happened to me, especially earlier in my career. I tried so hard to be reliable that I became unreliable. Okay. So, why does it happen? Why does senior leadership, senior managers, why do senior people keep handing out work or asking us to take on stuff even when the plates are already full? So there are a number of reasons for it, and I won't be able to obviously dig into them all today. I won't be able to provide answers for them all today. But definitely, if you're in a habit of saying yes all the time and immediately, then that creates a cycle of expectation. Okay, so if from the minute you walk in the door or log on to the first time that you are a yes person, that you will take it on, that you say no problem straight away, then people expect that to be your response. And if somebody is more senior and they are really busy themselves and they might have decision fatigue and they have an awful lot on, then they're going to go to the path of least resistance for delegation. So they're going to go to the person who always says yes. Of course they are, because they're really busy and they need help now, and they go to the one who they know is going to help them. So what you'll find is, more often than not, there's nothing sinister going on. There's no hidden agenda. It's just that a busy senior person is going to the person who they feel will say yes and who will help them out quite quickly. Now, with all that in mind, so understanding why it's hard for us to say no and knowing why it's important to push back and trying to understand why it happens, how do we actually say no? How do you say no to somebody who's in a more senior position? Well, it definitely depends on who's asking. Okay, so I need to put a big caveat here, a big sign. Imagine me and you are sitting opposite each other, we're having a cup of tea, and above my head there's like a big neon sign flashing saying, it depends on who is asking. Take this into context. Think before you speak, okay? Because, if it's your manager, you'll respond very differently to somebody in another senior position. If it's a senior person you know well, you'll respond differently to a senior person you're meeting for the first time, okay? So just think about that. It always depends on who is asking and what they're asking. But what's good to know is that pushing back well, it's never emotional. It's all about resource management, capacity management. It's basically about you moving from a subjective feeling of, I'm too busy to take it on, to knowing what exactly is on your plate, how much time you have, and what will be impacted if you say yes to something else. Okay, because that's a logical approach that you can clearly articulate to somebody else and either help them understand or help you make a different decision about what it is you're working on. Okay, so a couple of things that you should do is, first of all, always pause before responding. I was a terror for just saying, no problem. Like, it literally rolled off my tongue so easily. I didn't even think about it, which is terrible, because by the time I'd finished saying no problem, my brain had caught up and said, it is a problem. So don't be me. Don't be how I used to be. Instead, just ask for 5 minutes. Can you give me 5 minutes? Or say, let me check my workload and I'll get back to you in a half an hour. Just give yourself a little bit of space before you say yes or no or maybe or whatever it is you're going to say. And if you need to, ask questions to clarify what work is being asked for, when is it due, when is it going to be used, what's going to be used for. Ask those clarifying questions if you need to. And I linked to a previous episode of the podcast where I discussed those clarifying questions. But again, just make sure you fully understand the ask. Okay. And in the space that you've given yourself, then you can take a look at your current workload and check to see how does the request fit in with the rest of your work. Okay. So sometimes you might find that when you take a look at the rest of your work for the week and maybe into the following week, it's actually not too bad. And if the requester has a bit of wiggle room around the due date, again, I'll link to my episode on urgent tasks and urgent people to talk more about the urgency piece. But if there's a bit of wiggle room, you might find actually we don't need to say no. You can say yes, but, and change the timeline. Or you might find that even if it's a small task, that other balls will drop if you pick it up and you need to have a check-in with your manager. So really take a look at what's on your desk already by priority, the current urgency, and looking at how the request fits in gives you the confidence in your next action. All right. And, if you're saying no, then you can give that context. And, if you're saying no to your manager, you can offer to sit down and review the workload with them. If you're saying no to somebody else, you can offer to check with your manager if they feel like you are the best person to help them. Or you could offer a viable alternative. So you could, say, look, I can't do all of it, but I can help with this part. Or, I can help with it on Tuesday if you still need help on Tuesday or something like that. But ultimately, it's all down to you understanding what's being asked, you know what's on your plate, and then how you communicate back. Okay. And so there's a few kind of phrases that you could use, which might be helpful for you. So if you're trying to buy time or to get a bit of space, You could say something like, that sounds really interesting. Let me quickly check what's on my desk for the next 2 days and I'll get back to you within the hour. Okay. So you're coming back to the person within an hour. It's unlikely that they're going to disagree with that. If they do, if they need an answer right now, then that is either because they're being an urgent person or because they do generally need urgent help, which again is helpful for you to make your decision. If it's an optional thing you're being asked to do, so it's say outside of your role, it's a voluntary thing, or a voluntary project or a side project, and you want to kind of protect your capacity, you could say something like, thanks for thinking of me, but I'm currently fully committed on such and such a project, and I've got deadlines coming up, but thanks for thinking of me. And again, this kind of comes back, by the way, to understanding the difference between your core job and other things that you do within the organization and across different teams that are also beneficial, but they aren't part of your day to day, and knowing that difference. Now, if you are being asked to focus on something that they say is high priority and you're not so sure, you could just say, look, yeah, happy to take it on. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page, could you check in with my manager, or I'll check in with my manager to see which of the existing tasks I have are going to be deferred or deprioritized so I can help you on this. And what you're saying here is, look, you're saying this is a priority. Other people are saying other things are a priority. So I'm just going to get some clarification on that. And again, you can offer to have a chat with your manager yourself and revert back to the person, or maybe they might like to speak to your manager directly. Okay, again, it just depends on who it is. So there are just some ways that you can, phrase your response. They're all positive. They're all explaining where you're at, what you're working on, and, what you can't help, or what would the impact be if you did help. Okay. But really, it's all about understanding your capacity and then having a clear understanding of what's being asked. Now, when it comes to manager support, it's also really important for you to understand, when you should check in with your manager and when you can make decisions about your workload yourself. Again, it depends on your job, it depends on your seniority, it depends on how long you've been in the company and all those things. But it's really good for you to know if everything you're asked to do should go through your manager, or if you have some leeway that you can make your own decisions, okay? And just have that conversation with them, because misaligned expectations and that can create all sorts of unnecessary chaos in the workday. And also, if they are saying that they will be your shield to, these requests, then use it. Always defer to your manager if that's what they're saying they're happy for you to do. All right. So if you were going to do anything today, I would suggest you take a minute now to take a look at your current workload and to ask yourself, if I was asked to take on something extra this week, could I? And if I'm already full, what would be impacted if I did have to take on something extra this week, right? And even that little bit of space now, thinking about it, and will prime you to better respond to any requests you might receive. And then you might like to set up a conversation with your manager, as I said, to, agree priorities, check to see how much involvement they'd like in terms of fielding new requests and stuff like that. And if you want to do one more thing, if you're going all out, I'd ask you to kind of take note of the more senior people that engage with you most often, and ask yourself, is there any proactive conversations you could have to manage their expectations around your capacity? Okay, so it could be as simple as just kind of having a check-in with them once every couple of weeks, seeing what's happening with them and letting them know what you're working on, or, it could be another kind of update. But again, it's all around, I suppose, that awareness piece, and then understanding the ask and communicating effectively. So look, it's not always easy to say no at work. I do want to say that. I know sometimes it can feel awkward. You probably will make a mistake once or twice in your career and say no at the wrong time for the wrong thing. I've done it. Everybody I know has done it. Okay, it is inevitable. But the other side of it is, if you never say no for the fear of making that mistake, you're only going to lead yourself into bigger problems, overwhelm, burnout, unrealistic achievements, and all those kind of things. And I do not want you to fall into that trap. So if you found this episode helpful, please connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know which part of this episode was most helpful to you. And as always, if you'd like me to help more people create a better workday, one of the things you can do is share this, subscribe, leave a rating or a review, and all that helps me reach more people. All right, that's it from me this week. Until next time, stay well and have a better workday.